My husband, who has been married to me for 10 years, suddenly wants a divorce. When he arrived at the court, just as he was about to process the divorce paperwork, his phone rang. So, that usually gentle and refined man was violently beating me in the courtroom while pulling my hair. In the next moment, the police pinned him to the ground. He tilted his head back, glaring at me fiercely, and I fearfully shrank into the arms of the female officer, not daring to lift my head. My husband, who hadn't come home for a month, suddenly appeared and threw a stack of photos in front of me. Gina, I want a divorce. I hung my head, staring intently at the photo on the table. The person in the photo is me, yet not me. My voice choked, tears streaming down my face. Jeff, can you? Jeff furrowed his brows and unceremoniously dragged me to the courthouse. The divorce agreement and the division of premarital property were signed a month ago, which means that a month ago, Jeff and I had already been to court. The staff member was a kind-faced middle-aged woman, thoughtfully looking at our marriage certificate, which had a photo of Jeff when he loved me the most. Oh, young couples inevitably have their ups and downs. Go back and think about it. If you come to a clear decision, come back in a month. Jeff and I each put away our documents and turned to leave, while a woman's voice faintly echoed behind us, let's sit down and talk. After all, we're a couple, we fight at the head of the bed and make up at the foot. After leaving the courthouse, Jeff said nothing and just walked away. Since then, I haven't seen Jeff much. This time, the staff member was a stern-looking man holding a document. He glanced at me and Jeff a few times and asked, have you made up your minds? After receiving the divorce certificate, Jeff's phone rang, and I saw his expression change dramatically. The usually gentle man suddenly had red eyes and, without any courtesy, grabbed my hair. What did you say to Ketty? I looked at him in confusion, tears streaming down my face. Jeff, it hurts so much, let go. He grabbed my neck, unwilling to hear my explanations any longer, his fist clenched tightly, raining down on me like a storm. The pain came thick and fast from my body, the only regret being that I didn't dare to hit my head. A few uniformed police officers rushed in from outside, pinning him to the ground. He gritted his teeth, the veins on his forehead bulging, glaring at me fiercely. A female police officer crouched beside me, wanting to say a few comforting words. I rushed up and tightly hugged her, burying my head in her arms, trembling uncontrollably. Later, Jeff and I were taken to the police station. Sitting in the car, Jeff finally calmed down, letting out a disdainful snort as he turned to look out the window. I gently touched the ringless fourth finger, leaned my head against the back of the chair, closed my eyes, and pretended to sleep. Jeff was called in for a talk, and I sat in the hall, just receiving a glass of water from the female officer who had just held me. Mary came quickly, throwing the bag she was carrying at me with force. I didn't dodge, and the metal on the bag hit me. I lowered my gaze, my body shuddering slightly. Mom. Don't call me Mom, you eggless chicken. Mary glared angrily and cursed. I felt a flutter in my brow. Just as I was about to speak, a figure blocked my way. My sister has already divorced your son. If you say such things again, I'll sue you too. I gazed at the figure in front of me and smiled with satisfaction. My younger brother has grown up and knows how to protect others. Frank held my hand tightly and led me out the door, while Mary was still shouting behind us. Along the way, Frank said nothing, staring straight ahead, quietly driving forward. Frank. I called out with a hint of amusement. Sister, your sacrifice is a bit too much. I raised an eyebrow. Did you get the surveillance footage? Frank pressed his lips tightly together, unwilling to pay me any more attention. All right, Frank, what did you tell the police about Jeff? Unforgiving, intentionally harming others, detained for 5 days. Frank looked up at me and said, Linda, you don't have to put yourself in danger for Gina. I looked out the window and softly hummed, that's enough, let's prepare for the next step. Yes, I am not Gina, I am Linda, Gina's twin sister. Gina and I are twins, and Frank is my uncle's son. My father's family was not well off, while my mother was the wealthy daughter of the richest man in Haicheng. Back then, she insisted on marrying my father, and my wealthy grandfather was determined to sever ties with her. When I was 8 years old, my father incurred a huge debt due to gambling, which forced my mother to bear a heavy burden. Eventually, the two of them drove into the river while fleeing, tragically passing away together, leaving my sister and me behind. But Grandma dislikes that my sister and I are girls, and she is unwilling to adopt us at all. At that moment, my uncle appeared. He told me that he could adopt us and provide us with the best education, but once we reached adulthood, we would have to meet one of their conditions. Uncle and Grandpa secretly observed us for several years. When I was 16, my uncle had a talk with me. Between Gina and me, only one of us could pursue what we wanted to do, while the other had to repay the debts owed by our parents. My sister has a very sweet mouth and is very likable. Whether in the past or now, she has always been favored. Even though we are only a few minutes apart, our personalities are completely different. The meaning of my uncle is to make me the scapegoat. So I went abroad to study financial management, while Gina studied her beloved art back home. In the first year, Gina would often keep in close contact with me, discussing everything from major events to minor details in depth. Due to my busy studies and the impact of the time difference, she mostly sends messages unilaterally. Later, she talked to me less and less, and her tone seemed to carry a lot of resentment towards me. Several times, she called in the middle of the night, cursing at me, her emotions fluctuating greatly. When I was preparing to return to my country, my uncle called me and said that Gina was fine, telling me to focus on my studies and return home as soon as possible. Gina apologized to me, crying and saying she was wrong. I comforted her a bit, thinking that this matter was resolved. When she was 18, Gina met Jeff. I learned about it from her Facebook. Jeff is the bartender, looking quite handsome, the type that young girls like. Before long, without knowing what Jeff had said, the usually well-behaved and understanding Gina suddenly started putting on makeup, dressed boldly, and looked very rebellious. In just half a year at the university I just got into, I failed all the credits for 3 years. I called Gina, but she didn't answer at all. When I messaged her, I realized she had already blocked me. Later, Uncle sent Gina to a prestigious school, ordering her not to associate with outsiders. I have called to probe more than once, and Gina always said she was studying well, but regarding other matters, she kept silent. When Gina was 20 years old, she became pregnant before marriage. Frank told me about this. He said it was raining heavily that day, and Gina and Jeff were kneeling outside the villa, forcing Grandpa to agree. As for the matter of her parents, others kept it from her, but I never hid it from her, hoping to give her a warning. I don't understand why she still chose this path. I can only seize the time to complete the final assignments. Gina was driven out by her furious grandfather, just as he had driven away her foolish mother all those years ago. I no longer heard Frank talk about Gina, but I could still see Gina's Facebook. She dropped out of school, got married, and the child didn't stay. After returning to the country, I looked for her. Her eyes were curved like a child still being pampered, and then she said to me, "Sister, Jeff has always thought I am an only child. I don't want you to appear again. Only daughter." I chewed on these 2 words repeatedly, feeling a bit amused. Gina's expression darkened. "Sister, everyone treats me like a fool, and you do too. Why can you study financial management and enter a company after graduation, while I can only study dancing and painting?" I paused with my hand holding the cup, looking at her with some complexity. "Is that what you think? What's learned and grasped is eternal, isn't it?" I looked at Gina, who was full of schemes, and couldn't help but sigh inwardly, wondering if I had taken a wrong turn on this path. Gina answered a phone call, and after hanging up, she stood up to leave. I asked one last question, "Gina, isn't it better to just enjoy it?" Gina did not turn back and replied in a low voice, "Sister, those who enjoy directly are useless." I watched her silhouette, thinking, if only I had said it earlier, I want to be a useless person. Later, Gina would always refuse my invitations, and she pulled me into her blacklist on WeChat, but she never said a word to me. And I, following her wishes, discussed with my uncle about keeping my existence low-key in front of others. A year ago, she suddenly sent me a message, "Sister, if I get divorced, what will you think of me?" My heart skipped a beat as I was rushing the project, and the call I made was immediately hung up. I dare not hesitate and sent her a message, "You are always welcome at home. If you want to learn financial management, I can teach you personally." Gina was silent for a long time before replying, "Okay, thank you, sis." Later on, Gina started to contact me frequently again, but still wouldn't allow me to appear in front of her. I didn't know why she was doing this, and she never gave me an answer. One day a month ago, she didn't message me. Facebook sent a message that she was traveling abroad. I asked someone to find out some news for me, and that person sent me a photo. In the photo, Jeff was kissing another woman. I asked him, "What about Gina?" He replied quickly, "Sorry, I haven't seen Miss Gina." Recently, the news is filled with reports about husbands killing their wives. Every time I see one, I feel an inexplicable anxiety, but I don't want to think that way. I now have a debt to repay to my parents, and I have also saved some money. If it were just for money, I think I could afford it. Money was spent again and again, but there was no response from those who were gathering information. More than a month ago, Jeff had a car accident, and Gina went on the trip alone. The news Frank heard was that Jeff had lost his memory. I looked at my face in the mirror, which was identical to Gina's, and a bold idea surged into my mind. After Jeff was discharged from the hospital, my plan could finally be put into action. Half a month ago, I changed my sharp black suit into a little white dress, got myself all dirty, and I asked Frank to find someone to take me to the police station. It's Mary who has come. I've seen her countless times in photos, but this is my first time meeting her. Mary is carrying a bag worth nearly $100,000, looking impatient. "Oh, the lady is back from her trip?" I pinched the hem of my clothes, pretending to look anxious as I turned to Mary. "Do you know me?" Mary looked at me with a stern face, while the police officer beside her whispered an explanation. I carefully observed Mary's expression, but in those eyes, there was only deep disdain. So, Mary probably doesn't know that the real Gina is missing. Mary took me home, and I followed her. Jeff was sitting on the sofa, his legs resting on the coffee table, and he glanced at me faintly as he said, "You're back?" Between husband and wife, when the wife disappears, the first suspect is definitely the husband. But the man before me. I was deep in thought when Jeff stood up and walked in front of me, leaning slightly forward, and said disdainfully, "Your grandfather doesn't want you anymore, and you still think of yourself as a princess? Running away from home in a huff, if you have the guts, don't come back." I stared with wide eyes, trying hard to squeeze out a few tears, and reached out to tug at Jeff's shirt hem. He forcefully shook my hand away and looked at me impatiently. "I'm on a business trip for the next few days, don't contact me if there's nothing urgent." When Mary saw Jeff leave, she also left, and the small house of over 100 square meters was surprisingly left with just me. But I dare not be negligent. I can't get in touch with Gina, and anyone related to Gina is someone I must suspect and be wary of. Although they seem very ordinary, I still cannot afford to be careless. Mary came back in the evening, looking very sulky. She sat cross-legged on the sofa watching TV, cracking sunflower seeds and throwing the shells on the floor. The TV was showing the part where the female lead was giving birth, and she glanced at me lightly. "It's been 10 years, and there's still no movement in the belly. Are you planning to cut off the Chin family? It would be better to get a divorce quickly." I lowered my gaze and looked at a video on my phone, where Jeff was holding the female lead I had prepared for him, and before long, they were rolling around together. A fruit hit my forehead, causing a bit of pain. I closed my eyes for a moment and looked up, where Mary was staring at me with disdain. "Gina, I'm talking to you." I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Mary interrupted me. "It's always been like this. I don't know what my son sees in you." I felt a little more relaxed after watching Mary return to the room. I accidentally found Gina's phone in the drawer by the bed, and this discovery took me by surprise. After finally charging my phone and turning it on, a series of messages popped up, the most frequent being the calls I made, along with a mysterious number. I hesitated for a moment, then dialed the other person's number. They picked up quickly, and it was a woman's voice. Gina. You scared me to death. Can we meet tomorrow? The other party was silent for a long time, and then suddenly spoke with a hint of tears in their voice. Okay. The next day after Mary left, I also went out. The agreed location is the Lynn family's property. Only on my own territory can I ensure my personal safety. About half an hour later, I met someone I was not unfamiliar with, Leo, my fiancé's sister. I have a fiancé named Leo, who is a police officer. I met him after returning to my country. Leo shrank his neck and sat with his head down across from me, sister-in-law. I placed my phone on the table and said, "Go ahead and talk." From Leo, I learned that she was the person my fiancé arranged to be by my sister's side 5 years ago, and Jeff might be related to a human trafficking case. I paused, my fingers tapping on the table as the door to the private room was pushed open. Leo, with a furrowed brow and visible dark circles under his eyes, sat across from me, his face cold. You didn't discuss your actions with me? I lifted the corners of my mouth and let out a light laugh. Isn't it what Officer Leo likes, my reckless and defiant behavior? Leo covered his mouth, his eyes shining brightly, and then retreated under Leo's fierce gaze. Human trafficking case? I asked through gritted teeth. Gina is fine, other things are confidential. However, I can tell you some things you can know. Leo sighed and began to speak in detail. What Leo said is not much different from my own private investigation, it's just that in the areas I was unclear about, he provided explanations. Jeff's father, Chin Feng, is a death row inmate. In order for her son to have a future, Mary divorced Chin Feng and left the town with her son to come to this city. His family is not wealthy, in other words, they are very poor. Jeff dropped out of middle school and, lacking in education, drifted through various nightclubs, relying on his looks to seduce girls with some financial means into relationships. When Jeff met Gina, he was already 25 years old. After so many years of being surrounded by people who piled money on him, he actually had a somewhat decent appearance. He was able to patiently pursue Gina for nearly 2 years and could tell at a glance that the clothes and jewelry she wore were quite valuable. I thought I had soared to the top, but little did I know my grandfather was ruthless, preferring to sever ties. I basically send Gina a sum of money every month, which I stopped after meeting her once a year ago when I returned to my home country. Leo set his sights on Jeff because Jeff's girlfriend was arrested when he was 18 years old. The girl is from Jiangnan. Since her parents were busy working outside, they neglected her upbringing and felt they owed their daughter, so they gave her a lot of money. She, in turn, used this money to chat with others. Jeff was added to the group by her. After chatting for about half a year, when he suggested meeting, she impulsively came here, relying on the funds provided by her parents to support both Jeff and herself. About a year later, her parents discovered she was not at home, so they stopped her card and no longer gave her money, while Jeff, unable to get any money from her, drugged her and sold her. She relied on her looks and cleverly coaxed the leader escorting her, thus avoiding the agony of death. According to her account, Jeff sells a young and beautiful girl every couple of years, and these girls are more exquisite than the last, articulate and refined, not even uttering a curse word, and none are as willing to sacrifice as she is. Some are sold to the village as brides, while others have their organs sold. However, words alone are not enough, her testimony alone cannot lead to a conviction. I struggled to digest this information, thinking of that mother and son, feeling a bit regretful for being so reckless. Do you think Jeff really has amnesia? Leo raised his hand to rub his brow, his tone revealing a hint of helplessness. Jeff's contact has been compromised, and Gina's life or death is currently unknown. Whether it's true or false, he won't act rashly. I nodded and then made a phone call to my uncle. By the time we returned to the Chin family home, it was already 8 o'clock in the evening. Jeff, who has been on a business trip for a few days, is now standing in the living room, looking at me with a sullen expression, his gaze filled with suspicion and hostility. Where have you been? I lowered my eyes and said softly, Uncle hasn't contacted me for a long time, he wants to see me on the phone. Mary was having dinner when she glanced at me and scolded, "You have the illness of a young lady, but not the life of one." Jeff withdrew his gaze, his long fingers tapping lightly on the armrest of the sofa, producing a crisp sound. I quietly sent a message, "What happened?" The other party replied quickly, "He left after taking a call." Should I call him again? After finishing the message, Jeff's phone on the coffee table rang. He answered the call, and although I couldn't hear it clearly, I could make out a soft feminine voice, moaning in pain. "I just want to take Gina's name to seek the truth, and I don't want to really put myself in danger. If it comes to a last resort, I will anger him, but for now, there is still a chance." Jeff put on his clothes and got ready to leave. Before he left, he glanced at Mary, who nodded knowingly. "Son, don't worry, I will take good care of her." After Jeff left, Mary returned to her room. I received a message from Leo, "This house has no other communication devices." So at ease, it didn't seem like a habitual offender involved in trafficking for years. It was only later that I learned it wasn't that Jeff didn't want to, but that Mary wouldn't allow it. The one outside named Ketty is a recent graduate, a young girl who lives alone all year round, with her parents not around. I got in touch with her half a month ago, and at that time, she didn't care at all about being a third party, even claiming that only those who are unloved are the third party. I don't know how much she understands about Jeff, or how deep her feelings really are. So, I patiently told her a story. Ketty suppressed her previous expression, looking at me seriously, and suddenly let out a light laugh, taking a cigarette case out of her bag. "Do you mind?" I shook my head, watching her pull out a cigarette, toss the box carelessly onto the table, take a deep drag, and then slowly speak, "I know I'm the next target. Jeff has lost his memory, it's true." Ketty took a few puffs, extinguished the cigarette, and then started to tell me everything from the beginning. She met Jeff a year ago, which aligns with what Gina told me about wanting a divorce. 3 months ago, Jeff thought she was asleep and answered the phone without hesitation, saying into the receiver, "I've already sold my wife to you, and now I still want to play for a few more days." She was puzzled, and Jeff continued, "How many people have I sold to you? Am I not an honest person?" Later, Jeff's voice grew fainter, and she fell asleep. She always thought it was her illusion until she realized that she could only sleep late when Jeff was not around. In this confusion, she began to rethink the little moments of this time and discovered that every time Jeff was there, he would prepare a cup of warm milk for her. Ketty leaned back and said, "I can help you, but you have to give me 1 million. A letter of introduction for studying away from home, plus 2 million. I looked at the person in front of me and pushed a document towards her. "In half a month, you give this to him and just say, 'You are pregnant.'" I watched Ketty's silhouette and hid the last card I had specially designed for her. Thanks to the Lin family's great fortune, otherwise this play would indeed be difficult to perform. A few days ago, after Ketty told Jeff she was pregnant, Jeff threw a huge tantrum. It was only after Ketty insisted and argued that he went to the hospital for a re-examination, and the result was oligospermia. Jeff stood in the hospital corridor with the results, his anger turning to joy, and suddenly he burst into tears. In Jeff's investigation report, there indeed appeared a test result for azoospermia. I think this is one of the reasons why he would sell women. I am not surprised by the result of his re-evaluation. I think my foolish sister is not so foolish as to find such a useless man to be a father. I stood in the monitoring room watching Jeff, speculating, it seems he hasn't lost his memory. Leo snorted coldly, "Are you going to withdraw?" I looked at an unknown email on my phone, just add more fuel to the fire. Leo leaned over, peering at my phone, "Divorce agreement?" I tried to add the other party using Gina's account, but this account was completely blank. Go investigate when Gina and Jeff went to the courthouse. Leo raised an eyebrow, "We haven't even gotten our marriage certificate, and you're getting a divorce certificate for her?" I ignored him and sent a message to Ketty, asking her to pester Jeff. Ketty replied quickly, "Okay." After dragging it out for a month, Jeff finally returned home under Ketty's insistence, throwing a stack of photos onto the dining table. Mary rarely spoke. I looked at the photo, which was taken of me and Leo entering and exiting the hospital, hotel, and club. Leo's face wasn't fully visible, but it was just enough to recognize it was my photo, and then I packed it up and sent it to Ketty's house. My voice choked, and with all my strength, I squeezed out 2 drops of tears. He lost his patience and unceremoniously dragged me to the courthouse. The staff member this time was Leo's colleague, with a stern face, exuding an undeniable sense of righteousness. Holding a document in hand, he looked up at me and Jeff a few times. "Have you thought it through?" After receiving the divorce certificate, Jeff's phone rang, and his expression, which had been lively and animated, suddenly changed. "This is the final blow," I had Ketty deliver to him. "I will use this incident to guide public opinion. There will always be busybodies who will dig into his affairs, and if a reward is offered, his misdeeds will be made public." Jeff suddenly turned red-eyed and, without saying a word, grabbed my hair. "What did you say to Ketty?" I looked at him in confusion, tears streaming down my face. "Jeff, it hurts so much, let go." "It really hurts, I feel like I've lost a bit." He grabbed my neck, unwilling to hear my explanations any longer, his fist clenched tightly, raining down on me like a storm. The pain came thick and fast from his body, the only regret being that Jeff didn't hit hard, surprisingly not daring to strike at the head. A few uniformed police officers rushed in from outside and pinned him to the ground. Jeff glared at me through clenched teeth, while Leo, holding him down, slightly tightened his grip on the back of his neck, stopping his movements. "Don't move." With the cooperation of everyone and Frank's lack of understanding as a family member, Jeff could only be sentenced to 5 days of detention, and during these 5 days, everyone needed to work together to uncover the truth. Leo led the team to search Jeff's house, while I released the video of the court beating and Gina, who was still unconscious in her hospital bed. Being beaten is real, and fainting is real, but it's just not the same person. Then what does it matter? Jeff is hiding very deep. Not only is there no progress on Leo's side, but I am also at a standstill. Those who can testify have emotional entanglements with Jeff, and as witnesses, they lack the strength. With only 24 hours left of Jeff's detention, Gina received another email from that mysterious account. At the end of the email was an address, specifically instructing Gina to meet her. Leo rarely lit a cigarette, took a deep puff, and coughed continuously from the irritation. I looked up and my gaze fell on Leo. "What are you pretending for?" Leo pursed his lips and gently extinguished the cigarette in the ashtray. "Go?" I nodded. The agreed meeting place is in the bustling city center, still a coffee shop, and my chance of an accident is only 50%. I handed the phone to Leo, letting them prepare for the next step, and went alone. Leo was busy with a case, and then he called Frank over, along with his uncle. I looked at the two of them, feeling somewhat at a loss for words. Frank unbuckled his seatbelt. "I'll go with you." I looked at the glass window of the cafe, and sitting by the window was Mary. For some reason, I felt that it was Mary who had emailed me. "No need, don't worry." I pushed open the door of the cafe and walked towards Mary, sitting across from her. She looked up at me, and I quietly gazed at her. Mary laughed. "You must be Linda, right?" I was taken aback for a moment and nodded. "You." Mary retracted her smile, turning her gaze to the window, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Jeff is the scapegoat. Jeff's dad is Mike, from Bachin Village. He contacted me behind my back with his father. I once thought that children were innocent, but after all these years, I have come to realize that poor genes truly cannot be changed." "Then you." I carefully examined Mary, her face not as exquisitely made up as before, bare and unadorned, giving me a sense of familiarity. My name is Cardline. Cardline, the youngest daughter of the Leon family who has been missing for nearly 30 years, Leo's aunt. That day when I caused a scene with you at the police station, it was to get this." Cardline handed me a document and then stood up. "This is the evidence Jeff has kept over the years, hidden in his countryside home. I don't want to see him again." I found Leo with the document bag. Through the one-way glass, I saw the dejected Jeff. "Leo, it's Cardline." Leo paused for a moment with the document bag in his hand, looking at me with some surprise. Do you know Mike? Leo pressed his lips together and nodded slightly. Mike is the biggest human trafficking crime lord in nearly 30 years, and he has always been our target. It was only a few months ago that we discovered Jeff has a close connection to this operation, and he might even become the breakthrough we need. I recalled the uncontrollable disgust and regret that Cardline expressed when mentioning Jeff, and couldn't help but let out a sigh. Leo looked at me in confusion, and I shook my head, gently patting his shoulder. It's up to you from here. Outside the police station, the sun was high in the sky, radiating dazzling light, a symbol of hope and dawn. The warm sunlight bathed over me, dispelling the gloom that had settled in my heart, bringing a sense of warmth. After 30 years of relentless effort, the police finally used Jeff as a breakthrough to successfully dismantle the human trafficking crime group led by Mike. A total of 37 criminals were arrested, and 71 victims of trafficking were rescued. Jeff followed the old path of Mike, suspected of human trafficking numerous times, and even had abused them to the point of death. On the day the death sentence was handed down, Gina woke up, staring blankly at the television screen. The audience erupted in uncontrollable applause and cheers. I crossed my arms and looked at Gina. Have you made your decision? Gina's eyelashes trembled slightly, her hand tightly gripping the blanket, her voice barely a whisper. Sister, I want to learn design. Gina is very talented in art, far surpassing my poor useless father. I looked at Gina, who dared not raise her head, and sighed. Do whatever you like, I will always be your support. After the Mike case was solved, the bureau gave Leo a short vacation, and he couldn't wait to drag me to register for marriage. Gina slowly clapped her hands with red eyes. Leo held my hand tightly, and I looked up, my gaze colliding perfectly with his starry eyes. The path of life is walked by oneself, and every step taken requires careful consideration. Regardless of right or wrong, one can only move forward, with no regrets. It's just that, no matter how old you are, you can start over. Tomorrow's you won't let you live a hard life forever.